Okay, so we have finished our sculpt to this level of detail, but now if we wanted to add finer details to this, we need to talk a little bit more about retopology. Because we used the dynamic topology setting when we were sculpting, the topology of this mesh, if you tab into edit mode, you'll see that not only is it extremely dense, but there's just no edge loops in this. There's no way that we could use a multi-res modifier with this to add surface details. And also, if we wanted to animate this mesh, we would not be able to do it with this type of dense triangulated mesh. So let's tab back into object mode. So the way that we would move forward with a piece from this stage, either for high res sculpting or for animation, is through retopology. Now, retopology is simply a process of simplifying this model by basically creating a new model directly over it that has a lower polygon count and has a cleaner edge flow. So there are some things to keep in mind when retopologizing a mesh. And one is, what is this model going to be used for? If it is going to be used for animation in particular, there are certain things that you need to keep in mind when creating your new low-res mesh over this. And that is the topology or the edge flow, which is basically just how polygons are shaped around this mesh. And let me just show you an example of what a good topology on a face looks like. So this is a retopologized mesh that has appropriate edge flow for animation. So the things to note with pieces like this is that what is really important is that we have consistent edge loops around any areas of our mesh that are going to be deformed through animation. So in this case, if the mouth needs to move, we need to have edge flows, or edge loops rather, that go cleanly around the mouth in a circle, so that I could alt and click right here and it would select this entire edge loop. Now in this image, they have highlighted all the sections and loops that are appropriate for animating a mesh. And to find a guide like this, you can honestly just Google face topology and you will get many examples of faces that have highlighted the rings and edges around the eyes and the mouth and areas of the mesh that need to be deformed. And they will highlight them to show you better how these faces and edges need to flow. So this is going to become more clear when we get further in and we actually start retopologizing our own model, but just know that you can just simply Google something like face topology guide and you will get a lot of image results that will show you basically where your loops need to be. So for a human face, they need to be around the eyes, around the eyebrows if you plan on animating that, and around the mouth are the most important points. So now that we have a general idea of how our finalized retopologized mesh should look, let's jump back into Blender and see what we can do to basically have this topology on this mesh. So the way retopology works is basically I'm just going to model a new mesh over this existing one in such a way that it matches the shapes I have created through sculpting mode. So we're going to start with a plane, and actually I'm going to tab into the modeling workspace right here. If you have started from a sculpting template, the layout and the modeling workspaces will not be up here. You will only have sculpting and shading, but you can add any workspace you need back into this file just by simply clicking the plus icon here. You can come into general and choose modeling or layout or any workspace you need. So I've just chosen the modeling and it will add it here at the end. Now, if you want to reorder these, you can right click on any of these workspace tabs and say, reorder to front, and that will put modeling at the front, reorder to back, and you can organize your workspaces that way. So let's move into the modeling workspace. And it took a second because it automatically put us into edit mode. Let's just exit into object mode again. Okay, and I'm going to just do a couple things to set this up for myself. I'm going to come into the overlays drop down and I'm going to disable the floor, which will get rid of this grid that is intersecting our mesh. And I'm going to disable these X and Y axes lines because I know which direction this is facing already and it is just getting in my way. Okay, so to start to retopologize this mesh, I'm going to press Shift A on my keyboard and I'm going to add in a plane. Now, from here, I'm going to tab into edit mode because I want to leave the origin at the world center. And I'm just going to grab this plane and rotate it, scale it, so it is about here. Now, there's a few more things we need to do that are that is going to make this process a lot easier. Now, retopology is kind of one of those very tedious, time-consuming processes that you will quickly find that you may want to speed up the process wherever you can. So, just a couple things to start out with. So we have this plane here, but right now it's just kind of these points are floating away from our mesh. And rather than having to grab each point individually and move it to the surface, we can automate that process by turning on snapping. So let's come up to our snapping icon right here, and let's click the drop down. And by default, it has been set to increment, and that is what has allowed us to snap to the grid lines here. But we're going to change it from increment because we don't want it to snap to the grid. We want it to snap to this mesh. So in order to do that, let's come up here and change this to face. Now, this will open up these other options for you. And all you need to do is enable project individual elements, which will allow these surfaces to snap onto the faces of another object. So nothing has changed right now because we haven't moved anything. But if we were to select one of these points and press G on the keyboard, first we need to enable snapping. So all I've done is change the settings, but I forgot to actually press enable it. So make sure that this icon is highlighted. So now if we select a point and press G, it will snap to the nearest surface. So now we have this matching the surface of our sculpt, but we can't really see what we're doing. So there's a couple tricks that we can employ to enable to visualize what we're doing a little bit better. So the first thing I'm going to do is, with the plane selected, I'm going to come into the object properties of the plane object, and I'm going to come down here to where it says viewport display. I'm going to click this drop down, and down here at the bottom of these options, I'm just going to click the bubble that says in front. This will move the object, the rendering of the object, to the front of the mesh despite it being behind. So you can see now that it's not being clipped in. Although it is existing inside this mesh, it is always being rendered in front of it, just to better allow us to see what we're doing. The next thing we need to do to enable some viewport options that are going to allow us to visualize this a little bit better is we're going to turn on backface culling. So what backface culling is, let me hide this object for just a moment. Let's just hide all of these. So right now we have this singular face, and if we if we rotate around to the back of it, we can see the back of this face. Now, normally this is not an issue, but you will notice that as we start to pull things around to the back of this, because we have this as rendering in front, it's going to get very confusing as to what we're looking at, whether we are looking at the front of a face or the back of something in the back. So we need to turn on backface culling. Let's do that by coming up to the viewport shading options, clicking the drop down, and enabling this backface culling option right here. So now, if I view the front of this plane, we can still see it as we did before, but if I come around to the back, we can no longer see it. In fact, we can only see the outline because I have it selected. If I deselect it, it disappears entirely. So that is just going to make it a little bit easier to see what we're doing as we get farther into our retopology. The next thing that might help your visualization is enabling some color modes on this. Now, right now it is difficult to see the difference between this and this because they are the same color. So there are a couple of ways you can do that. You can come down here in the same viewport display and change the color. But you will notice that this does not change the color in the viewport. In order to visualize this color on our mesh, we need to come back into our shading options and change the color from material to object. Another way that we can do this is if we come back into material, if we go into the material properties tab, if we click new to add a new material, and don't worry too much about any of this because we are going to cover it in a future video, but let's scroll down to viewport display, and there is the color option here, which will allow us to add a color in our viewport. The final option you have for enabling colors is to come into the viewport shading and change the color mode from material to random. This will assign a random color to every object in your scene on a per object basis. So the eyes are one color, the head is one color, and the earrings are one color. Now, you may notice that these earrings appear to be the same color as the head, despite the fact that they are different objects. Now, this is happening because there's only a select number of colors that Blender assigns, and you may get it to the point where it just happens to have assigned the same color to two different objects based on its randomization. Now, if you wanted to change the color of any one of these objects, you'd have to do so by renaming the object. So I have renamed my objects here in my outliner. I have this as granny underscore earrings. So if I needed to change the color so that this was a different color from the head, I could come in and change the name, and that would change the color of the object. So all of these are perfectly valid ways of changing the color of your object in order to help ease the view of it and helps you see what you're doing a little bit more clearly. So choose any of those methods that you like if you need to have different colors in order to be able to see this a little bit easier. So the next thing we need to do to get ready to retopologize this is to add a couple of modifiers to the plane object. So make sure you have the plane, and you can even rename it to something like Retopology. So you know that this is the new mesh you are creating that is going to be the retopologized version of this old sculpt. So let's add our modifiers. So we're going to click on Add Modifier. And the first one we're going to add is under the Deform panel. We're going to go and click on Shrinkwrap. Now, what Shrinkwrap does is it basically, whatever object this modifier is on, meaning the retopology in this case, typo there, it is going to look at whatever object you put in the target field, and it is going to snap the surface of this retopology object onto the surface of the target object. Now, you may be wondering why we need both the shrink wrap and snapping turned on, because they both provide very similar functions. And I will just say that you will get a much more accurate result if you use both snapping and a shrink wrap modifier as opposed to using just one. So in order to get this shrink wrap working, because right now it is currently not working, and you'll know that because the icon here is red. To get this working, we need to give it a target. So let's give it the target of this head sculpt. Let's grab the eyedropper, click on the head, and now it is working. Nothing has really happened visually, but you'll see that if we start to extrude these out, no matter what our view angle is, it is going to snap along the surface of this mesh. Now, the next modifier we need to add is a mirror, and we are very familiar with the mirror modifier at this point. So add a mirror modifier to your retopology object, enable clipping, and now if we grab this edge and bring it to the center using G, we will now have this topology mirrored onto the other side of our mesh, which means that we will only have to retopologize half of this face and it will just be mirrored. The last modifier we're going to add is optional, and I only recommend adding it if you are having trouble with, if you're starting this retopology and you're having some issues seeing what you're doing and you notice that there's some flickering that might occur as you continue on. To combat this, let's add a displacement modifier. So just add the modifier, and under the deform column, hit displace. So currently we are not seeing any displacement happening. That is only because we have the edit mode display disabled. So let's enable edit mode display. And with the strength of 1 on here, you'll see that our mesh is, or our retopology mesh is being moved out from the surface. So let's just dial this back to about 0.1 or maybe even 0.05. Give it a very low value, maybe 0.025, so that it just will push this retopology object ever so slightly off of the surface. If you're having trouble visualizing it or you're getting any sort of flickering errors, don't worry, there's something wrong with your mesh. It is just a display problem, which you can fix using a displace modifier. But we're not going to use that right now because we're not having any of those issues. Just know that if you do, that is how you fix it. Now, before we really get started, there's a couple of add-ons that will make this easier. Now, because retopology is such a time-consuming and tedious process, there have been many add-ons created for it that help ease this workflow. And one I just want to point out to you is Retopology. You can find this in the Blender Marketplace. Now, this is a paid add-on, but I have used it myself. It does dramatically increase the speed at which you can retopologize things. We're not going to be using this in this video, again, because it is a paid add-on. But just know that if you start retopologizing and you're thinking, oh man, this is very time consuming and I wish there was a faster way, there are, you may need to invest a little later down the road if you find that you're doing a lot of retopology and you want to speed up the process. This is one I recommend. There are others out there. Some are paid, some are not. But I know for a fact that Retopology is a good one. Again, we're not going to use it because it is a paid add-on, but there is one more add-on that comes packaged with Blender that I do want to make sure we enable, and that is the F2 add-on. So come into Edit and Preferences, and under the Add-ons tab, you'll see I was already searching for it. We can come into the search bar and just press F2. And you'll get this Mesh F2 add-on. Just click to enable it and save, exit. So what this does is it is basically extended functionality for the fill tool, which we used in our modeling section. We would press F and we would fill in certain quads, lines, and faces. So what the F2 does, let's extrude this up so I can show you. Normally, without the F2 add-on, if we pressed F with this point selected, it would draw a triangle right here. But with the F2 add-on, now when we press F, it creates a perfect quad. And it draws that point out here. So this is just a sort of a workflow speed up that instead of having to, extrude and merge these points, we can just quickly add a new point here. And keeping these faces all quadrilateral is extremely important for having a good topology when you're retopologizing something, especially for animation. So that is the last thing I really wanted to discuss before we get started actually retopologizing this model. So I'm going to pause the recording here, and when we come back, we're going to continue on and retopologize this entire head model.